Deep in the emerald heart of the Amazon, where the rivers carve secrets into the land and the forest whispers stories older than memory, lives a people who have walked with the jungle since time itself seemed young, the Yanomami. The Yanomami are not just another tribe hidden away in the rainforest. They are one of the last great guardians of humanity's ancient ways. Their world is a tapestry of spirit and soil, where every tree has a voice, every river carries a memory, and every star holds meaning. To know the Yanomami is to step into a living museum of human resilience, where life and survival are woven seamlessly into the rhythm of the forest. But their story is not only about the past, it is about a timeless struggle to protect a culture, a land, and a way of life that the modern world is still trying to understand. Before we step deeper into the Amazon, let me ask you this. Have you ever wondered what it truly means to live in harmony with the earth? Today, you'll discover the story of the Yanomami, one of the last great guardians of the rainforest. If you love uncovering hidden histories and stories that the world almost forgot, make sure to hit the subscribe button, give this video a like, and share it with others who crave untold truths. Because what you are about to hear is not just history. It is a living heartbeat of humanity that still echoes today. The Amazon rainforest stretches endlessly, a green ocean of trees, rivers, and hidden paths that seem to defy human understanding. Within this vast expanse lives a people whose story begins so far back in time that it feels more like legend than history. They are the Yanomami, one of the largest indigenous groups in the Amazon, and their origins are as mysterious as the forest that shelters them. To understand their beginning, we must first understand the land itself. The Amazon is not simply a forest, it is a living system. Its rivers are as wide as seas, its canopy as high as mountains, and its diversity unmatched anywhere else on Earth. For the Yanomami, this land is not just a home. It is a sacred universe, full of spirits, animals, and ancestors who continue to guide them. Long before outsiders arrived, the Yanomami learned to read the signs of the forest, the direction of the wind, the flight of birds, the taste of leaves, and the movement of rivers. Anthropologists believe that the ancestors of the Yanomami first arrived in South America thousands of years ago, migrating gradually through Central America and into the Amazon basin. As centuries passed, they spread deeper into the forest, following rivers and hunting grounds until they reached the borderlands of what is today Brazil and Venezuela. Unlike some tribes who settled in villages that grew into cities, the Yanomami chose a different path. They lived lightly on the land, moving when resources grew scarce and building communities that could adapt to the rhythm of the forest. The Yanomami tell their own story of creation in a way that blends myth with memory. According to their oral traditions, the world was once formless until a being known as Omama shaped it. Omama gave the Yanomami fire, food, and the wisdom of the shaman. Yet, he also had a rival, Yoasi, who created misfortune, illness, and conflict. This duality, light and shadow, gift and challenge, remains at the heart of how the Yanomami understand the world. For them, the beginning was not a single moment in time, but an unfolding balance between harmony and danger. Daily life for the earliest Yanomami revolved around the forest. They hunted with bows and arrows, fished in clear rivers, and gathered fruits, nuts, and honey. They practiced a form of shifting agriculture, clearing small plots of land to grow cassava, bananas, and maize. These gardens provided food, but also carried spiritual meaning. The Yanomami believe that every plant, every tree, and every animal has a spirit, and that to take from the forest requires respect and ritual. Even the act of hunting was accompanied by prayers, for the hunter must ask forgiveness from the spirit of the animal he sought. Their homes reflected their worldview. Instead of separate houses, entire communities lived together in one enormous circular dwelling called a shabono. Built with wood, palm leaves, and vines, The Shabano had an open center, like a courtyard, where daily life unfolded. Here, children played, elders told stories, and rituals were performed beneath the stars. The circular form symbolized unity and equality, for every family had its place along the ring. To enter a Shabono was to step into the heart of Yanomami life, a world both practical and spiritual at once. Culturally, the Yanomami were storytellers and dreamers. Their shamans, known as Zapiripe Tepe, served as bridges between the human world and the spirit world. By inhaling a sacred powder made from plants, the shamans believed they could communicate with spirits who offered guidance, healing, and protection. These visions were not seen as private experiences, but as messages for the entire community. Through them, the Yanomami shaped their understanding of sickness, weather, and the unseen forces that moved through the forest. The beginning of the Yanomami story is also marked by their remarkable adaptation to one of the most challenging environments on Earth. The Amazon can be both generous and unforgiving. Its soil is poor, its insects relentless, its storms sudden and fierce. Yet the Yanomami developed an intimate knowledge of medicinal plants, survival techniques, and ecological balance. For them, the forest was never a wilderness to be conquered, but a living partner to be respected. In this relationship, they found stability where others might find chaos. Geographically, the Yanomami established their homeland in the border region between northern Brazil and southern Venezuela, a territory of mountains, rivers, and dense jungle. This area, still largely untouched by modern development, allowed them to maintain their traditions for centuries without significant outside interference. Villages were often separated by many days of walking, creating a mosaic of small, semi-autonomous communities that occasionally came together for feasts, marriages, and rituals. Their language further reveals their origins. The Yanomami speak a family of dialects that belong to the Yanomaman language group, which is unrelated to the languages of most neighboring tribes. This suggests that the Yanomami have been isolated for a very long time, preserving a linguistic heritage that connects them directly to their ancestors. Each word carries with it not only meaning, but also memory, a record of how they have named their world through countless generations. In many ways, the early Yanomami can be seen as both ancient and timeless. They lived in a way that might appear simple to outsiders, but was in fact highly sophisticated in its balance. They knew which plants could cure fever, which rivers carried the best fish, and which spirits to call upon in times of trouble. Their beginning was not marked by monuments of stone or cities of brick, but by a way of life that blended seamlessly with the cycles of nature. When we think of a classical period in history, we often imagine great empires, majestic temples, or glittering palaces. For the Yanomami, their classical period did not involve marble or steel, but rather a deeper weaving of traditions, rituals, and ways of life that defined who they were as a people. This was the time when the Yanomami's culture reached a steady and recognizable form, a way of living that endured for centuries in the heart of the Amazon. The Yanomami's world was organized around the Shabono, the great communal dwelling that served as the center of life. Each Shabono was more than a house. It was a living symbol of Yanomami identity. Shaped like a wide circle with an open courtyard in the middle, it brought together dozens of families under one enormous roof. Each family had its place along the outer ring, but the center belonged to all, a shared space for storytelling, dancing, feasting, and rituals. Life here followed a rhythm of cooperation, for survival in the forest required unity. The political structure of the Yanomami during this period was not like the centralized kingdoms known in other parts of the world. Leadership was fluid, resting in the hands of respected elders, skilled hunters, and powerful shamans. Decisions were made collectively, with persuasion often carrying more weight than authority. A man might gain influence by demonstrating bravery in a hunt, wisdom in settling disputes, or skill in guiding rituals, but no one ruled absolutely. In this way, power remained balanced and flexible, adapted to the needs of the community. Economically, the Yanomami thrived by combining hunting, fishing, gathering, and gardening. Their gardens, cleared with fire and simple tools, yielded cassava, bananas, maize, and plantains. Hunting parties provided meat from monkeys, tapirs, and wild boars, while fishing brought in fresh catches from the countless streams and rivers. Women gathered fruits, nuts, and medicinal plants, carrying baskets woven from vines. The balance between men's and women's contributions was essential. Without the gardens, there would be no steady food supply, and without the hunts, there would be no feasts to strengthen bonds among families. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Yanomami's classical period was their spiritual life. Shamans, known as Sapiripe Tepe, played a central role in keeping the balance between humans and the unseen world. They inhaled a sacred powder made from the bark of a tree called yopo, which opened visions of the spirit world. In these visions, shimmering beings called Zapiripe appeared, tiny, bright, and powerful. The shamans believed these spirits could heal sickness, protect the community, and explain the mysteries of life and death. Through ritual songs and chants, the shamans guided their people, linking the physical and spiritual realms. Rituals were woven into daily life. The Yanomami marked births, marriages, and even the passing of loved ones with ceremonies that blended music, dance, and offerings to the spirits. These were not moments of individual emotion, but communal events that reminded everyone of their shared identity. Around the fires of the Shobono, elders told stories of Omama and Yowasi, of the origins of plants and animals, of lessons carried through generations. These stories were not just entertainment, but living libraries, preserving history and values without written words. The classical period was also marked by the Yanomami's relationship with the forest itself. They did not see themselves as separate from nature, but as part of an interconnected web. Every animal, every tree, every river carried a spirit that deserved respect. If a hunter took the life of an animal, he spoke words of apology and thanks. If a tree was cut down, it was done with care and purpose. This worldview created a sustainable balance that allowed the Yanomami to live for centuries in the same land without destroying it. Where other civilizations consumed their environment until it collapsed, the Yanomami developed a rhythm of renewal, moving their villages when soil grew poor and allowing the forest to heal. Trade and exchange during this period were modest but meaningful. The Yanomami did not build marketplaces or long-distance trade routes like other cultures, yet they interacted with neighboring groups through gift exchange and shared rituals. Feasts between villages strengthened alliances, while marriages created bonds that tied different communities together. These networks helped spread not only goods but also ideas and stories, enriching the Yanomami's cultural life. Music and dance held a special place in their classical society. Drums made from hollowed logs, rattles filled with seeds, and chants accompanied rituals that could last through the night. Dances often imitated the movements of animals or represented journeys into the spirit world. To an outsider, these performances might appear as mere spectacle, but to the Yanomami, they were acts of renewal, ensuring harmony between people, spirits, and the forest. What made this classical period so enduring was its adaptability. The Yanomami had no written laws or rigid institutions, yet their way of life was strong enough to survive for centuries. Their traditions were carried in memory, passed from one generation to the next. Children learned by watching their parents hunt, gather, and garden. They listened to the stories told at night and absorbed the values of respect, courage, and cooperation. In this way, culture was not something preserved in books, but something lived every day. If we compare the Yanomami's classical period with the great civilizations of the past, Rome, Egypt, China, we might be tempted to measure their achievements in monuments or armies. But the Yanomami's achievement lay in something equally impressive: the ability to live in harmony with one of the most complex ecosystems on the planet. They built no stone pyramids, yet they built relationships with spirits that guided them. They left no written histories, yet their oral traditions carried wisdom across countless generations. By the end of this classical period, the Yanomami identity had been firmly shaped. They were a people of the forest, bound by communal life, sustained by gardens and hunts, guided by shamans, and united by stories. This way of life created resilience, allowing them to endure in isolation while other societies rose and fell. For countless generations, the Yanomami lived in near isolation, their world defined by the endless green canopy of the Amazon and the shimmering presence of spirits that guided them. Their shabonos, their gardens, their rituals, all of these formed a complete universe. Yet no people, no matter how deep in the forest, can remain untouched forever. Slowly, step by step, the outside world found its way into Yanomami lands. These encounters would change the rhythm of their lives in ways both subtle and profound. The first influences came not through armies or cities, but through whispers carried along river routes. Traders from neighboring groups passed through, bringing goods that the Yanomami had never seen before. Iron tools, beads of bright color, cloth that seemed almost magical compared to woven fibers of the forest. At first, these items arrived rarely, treated as treasures. A single iron axe could cut trees more easily than stone tools, reshaping the pace of gardening and house building. With each new object came curiosity, but also dependency. Religion was another wave of influence. Missionaries, guided by their own faith and purpose, journeyed into the forest. They brought books, crosses, and words of a god unknown to the Yanomami. To a people whose entire worldview was built on spirits, shamans, and the guiding hand of Omama, these teachings were puzzling. Some communities resisted strongly, clinging to their ancestral rituals, while others listened with interest, weaving new beliefs into old traditions. It was never a simple replacement. The Yanomami adapted what they heard, mixing it with their own cosmology. For them, the forest remained alive with spirits, even as they learned the names of new ones spoken by outsiders. Alongside religion came trade on a larger scale. Outsiders offered knives, cooking pots, hammocks, and even firearms in exchange for forest goods, feathers, fruits, or labor. The Yanomami, skilled in crafting arrows, baskets, and ornaments, began to see their creations valued by strangers. Yet these exchanges also created new tensions. What once was shared freely among families could now be measured, compared, and even contested. The economy of the forest, once based entirely on need and gift, began to shift under the weight of trade. But perhaps the most significant foreign influence was not something carried in hands, but something carried invisibly in the body: disease. For centuries, the Yanomami had lived in isolation from the outside world, and their immune systems had no defense against illnesses common elsewhere. When outsiders arrived, traders, explorers, missionaries, they unknowingly brought measles, influenza, and malaria. For the Yanomami, these were not mere sicknesses. They were invisible enemies, devastating communities in ways their shamans could not easily explain. Rituals were performed, chants were sung, but many lives were lost. To the Yanomami, this confirmed the belief that new spirits had entered their world, and they struggled to understand whether these spirits were gifts or curses. Contact also influenced their politics. Traditionally, Yanomami leadership was based on persuasion and respect, not on dominance. But as outside goods entered villages, leaders who controlled access to tools and trade gained more influence. The flow of foreign items could strengthen alliances or create rivalries. A man with an iron axe held more power than one without. In this way, outside contact reshaped even the subtle balances within the community. Despite these challenges, the Yanomami did not lose themselves. Their resilience was remarkable. Shamans sought new explanations in their visions, adapting to changing realities. Communities debated how much to accept and how much to resist. Some villages moved deeper into the forest, avoiding outsiders altogether, while others cautiously welcomed certain goods or teachings. This diversity of response reflected the flexibility at the heart of Yanomami culture. Language, too, began to shift under foreign influence. The Yanomami spoke their own family of dialects, but with contact came borrowed words for new items: knife, cloth, book. To an outsider, these might seem small, but to a culture that carried memory through spoken word, each new term was a sign of how the outside world was weaving its way into the Yanomami vocabulary. Foreign influence also brought visibility. Anthropologists, drawn by curiosity, began documenting Yanomami life. They sketched shabonos, recorded chants, and photographed rituals. Some came with respect, seeking to preserve knowledge, while others imposed their own judgments. For the Yanomami, being observed was both strange and unsettling. They had always told their own stories, yet now outsiders were writing them down, framing their way of life through foreign eyes. Yet within this story of outside influence lies a paradox. The more the Yanomami were touched by the world beyond the forest, the more they became known globally as symbols of untouched purity. To governments and scientists, they represented the last uncontacted tribe, even as their daily lives were already being shaped by iron axes, new faiths, and foreign diseases. This tension between myth and reality would continue to follow them into the future. Still, the Yanomami's response to these influences was not passive. They were not simply receivers of change. They were active participants in shaping it. They decided which goods to adopt, which teachings to listen to, which strangers to trust. Their shamans adapted rituals to confront new illnesses. Their leaders negotiated with outsiders for tools and protection, and their communities made choices about whether to stay near rivers where contact was common or retreat into the deeper forest where life was harsher but more traditional. As we close this episode, we see that the foreign influences which entered the Yanomami AS world were like new rivers feeding into an old one. They brought fresh currents, sometimes nourishing, sometimes destructive, but always reshaping the flow. The Yanomami did not vanish under these influences. They endured, transformed, and adapted, carrying forward their identity even as they navigated new challenges. The Yanomami story is often told as one of survival in isolation, yet there was also a time of growth, a period when their communities flourished, their knowledge expanded, and their influence stretched further across the Amazon. Growth for the Yanomami did not mean cities of stone or armies marching across continents. Instead, it meant deeper wisdom about the forest, stronger social bonds, and innovations that allowed them to thrive in one of the most demanding environments on Earth. During this period, Yanomami villages multiplied. A single shabono might shelter more than 200 people, and as families grew, new shabonos were built nearby. The forest was vast, offering room for expansion, and rivers provided natural pathways linking communities. The Yanomami were not an empire, but their networks of villages created a living web across the borderlands of what is now Brazil and Venezuela. Families visited one another, exchanged goods, and joined in rituals that strengthened alliances. Technological growth, though simple compared to the inventions of the outside world, was deeply meaningful. Iron tools obtained through contact with neighbors or traders allowed faster clearing of gardens and sturdier construction of shabonos. Bows and arrows, already central to Yanomami hunting, became increasingly refined, with hunters perfecting the balance of wood, string, and feather to increase accuracy. Pottery, woven baskets, and hammocks were crafted with ever greater skill, blending utility with artistry. Each innovation was small, but together they represented a steady expansion of possibilities. The Yanomami's agricultural knowledge also deepened. Shifting cultivation, or slash-and-burn gardening, was not a careless act of destruction, but a carefully timed cycle. Villages cleared small plots of forest, planted cassava and bananas, then moved on after several years to allow the land to heal. In this way, the forest regenerated, and the community gained new resources without exhausting the land. This sustainable rhythm supported population growth and ensured food security. It was a form of agriculture that might appear fragile but was in fact remarkably resilient. Economically, the Yanomami expanded through trade. They exchanged goods with neighboring groups, offering items such as feathers from rare birds, resin used for sealing and lighting, and skilled craftsmanship in tools and ornaments. In return, they received beads, iron, or foods not common in their own region. These exchanges were not just about objects, they were about relationships. Trade bound communities together, and alliances forged through gifts helped prevent conflicts and encouraged cooperation. Cultural growth was equally significant. Rituals grew more elaborate, music more complex, and dances more refined. The central courtyard of the Shabono became a stage where entire communities performed together. Feasts could last for days, filled with songs that echoed into the night. Young people learned from elders not only through words, but also through participation. By joining in rituals, they absorbed values of unity, respect, and courage. Shamans, too, grew in influence during this period. As populations expanded, the role of the shaman became even more vital. Healers guided communities through illness, interpreted dreams, and mediated with the spirit world. Shamans trained apprentices, passing on their sacred songs and techniques for seeing the Zapiripe spirits. This ensured that spiritual knowledge was never lost, even as communities multiplied. Growth also meant adaptation to challenges. Larger populations required more careful planning of resources. Leaders, though never kings, gained more responsibility in guiding decisions, resolving disputes, and organizing hunts or rituals. With more people, the risk of conflict also grew, but the Yanomami's system of persuasion and collective decision-making helped maintain balance. What made this growth remarkable was its harmony with the environment. In many parts of the world, population growth has meant deforestation, soil exhaustion, or the collapse of resources. For the Yanomami, their intimate knowledge of the forest allowed them to expand without destroying. They understood which plants restored soil, which rivers replenished fish, and which hunting grounds could support larger numbers. In this sense, their growth was not a conquest of nature, but a dialogue with it. On a larger scale, this period of growth placed the Yanomami within the broader history of the Amazon. They were not alone. Other tribes lived nearby, each with its own traditions and territories. Some were friendly allies, others cautious rivals. The Yanomami's ability to expand while maintaining strong networks of kinship and trade helped them remain a significant presence in the region. Knowledge of medicine also expanded. The Yanomami discovered more uses for plants, roots, and herbs. They learned which leaves cooled fevers, which barks eased pain, and which vines could cleanse the body. This botanical wisdom, refined over generations, became part of the collective memory of the tribe. For the Yanomami, growth meant not only more people but also more knowledge that sustained life and preserved balance. To outsiders, such growth might appear modest. There were no towering cities or vast armies, no written laws or libraries. Yet, for the Yanomami, their classical way of life became even stronger during this period. They had what they needed: food, community, spiritual guidance, and harmony with their environment. Their growth was measured not in monuments but in the endurance of their culture, in the laughter of children playing in the Shabono, in the songs of shamans that echoed through the forest canopy. As the period of growth reached its height, the Yanomami seemed secure in their world. Yet history is rarely a steady upward climb. Growth often brings new pressures, and resilience is tested by crisis. For the Yanomami, challenges loomed on the horizon, challenges that would shake their balance and threaten their very survival. For centuries, the Yanomami had grown in harmony with the forest. Their world seemed endless, their gardens abundant, and their rituals strong. Yet every culture, no matter how deeply rooted, eventually encounters forces beyond its control. For the Yanomami, this moment arrived during the period of crisis. a time when outsiders entered their forest, bringing with them disease, greed, and disruption that shook the very foundations of Yanomami life. The first shadows of crisis fell when explorers, missionaries, and traders penetrated deeper into the Amazon during the 19th and 20th centuries. At first, contact was rare, a fleeting glimpse of strange faces along a riverbank or the distant sound of metal tools. But curiosity gave way to intrusion. Foreigners came searching for wealth, rubber, gold, timber, and the Yanomami's forest was suddenly no longer just their home. To the outside world, it became a frontier of resources waiting to be claimed. With outsiders came diseases that the Yanomami had never known. Measles, influenza, and malaria swept through villages with terrifying speed. Without immunity, whole communities fell ill. Elders who carried sacred knowledge of rituals and medicine were lost. Children, the hope of the future, perished before reaching adulthood. In some villages, half the population vanished within a few months. The balance that had been carefully maintained for generations began to unravel. The arrival of missionaries brought another challenge. They sought to change the Yanomami's beliefs, to replace shamans with priests, to substitute chants with hymns, and to rewrite the Yanomami's understanding of the cosmos. For a people whose identity was woven into their spiritual connection with the forest, this was not merely a difference of opinion. It was an assault on the heart of their culture. Some Yanomami resisted fiercely, while others, weakened by disease and hunger, accepted help in the form of medicine or tools. The result was tension within villages, a fracture in the unity that had once been unshakable. Perhaps the most destructive blow came with the gold rush of the late 20th century. Thousands of miners flooded into Yanomami territory, carving open the forest with machines and poisons. Rivers, once clear, became polluted with mercury, killing fish and poisoning the people who depended on them. The constant roar of engines replaced the songs of birds. Miners often brought violence, forcing Yanomami families to flee their ancestral lands. Confrontation sometimes ended in bloodshed, with the Yanomami left defenseless against firearms. The crisis was not only physical, but also psychological. Fear became a constant companion. Villages that once sang through the night fell silent, wary of strangers. Shamans worked tirelessly to protect their people, but even their chants could not stop the spread of foreign diseases or the relentless hunger of outsiders. Elders spoke of these Apiripe spirits retreating, angered by the destruction of their forest. The people began to wonder if their world itself was unraveling. Yet, amid the devastation, resilience emerged. The Yanomami had always been a people of survival, and even in crisis, they adapted. Some communities withdrew deeper into the forest, seeking isolation to protect themselves. Others learned to navigate the complex politics of the outside world, reaching out to sympathetic anthropologists, activists, and governments for support. A new generation of Yanomami leaders began to emerge, voices that would carry their struggle beyond the forest to the international stage. One of the greatest challenges of this period was the clash between two visions of the forest. For the Yanomami, the forest was a living being, sacred and eternal. For the outsiders, it was a resource, measured in gold, timber, and profit. This collision of worldviews fueled the crisis, making it more than just a struggle for survival. It was a battle over meaning, identity, and the future of an entire people. Stories from this time reveal the depth of the crisis. Entire villages abandoned their homes, leaving Shabonos empty and silent. Children were taught to hide at the first sign of outsiders, to melt into the trees as silently as jaguars. Shamans sang longer, harder, as if trying to hold back a tide that threatened to drown them all. Families who had once welcomed guests with food and laughter now viewed strangers with fear, for experience had taught them that strangers often carried death. And yet, within the darkness of the crisis, sparks of hope appeared. International attention grew as reports of massacres and disease spread beyond the Amazon. Human rights organizations began to campaign for the protection of Yanomami land. Some governments, pressured by activists, recognized the need to preserve indigenous territories. Though these efforts were uneven and often slow, they represented the first glimmer of outside support that did not come in the form of exploitation. The period of crisis was thus a paradox, a time of immense suffering, yet also the seedbed of Yanomami activism. It was in crisis that leaders like Davi Kopanawa emerged, carrying the voice of his people to distant cities and nations. It was in crisis that the Yanomami realized the forest alone could not shield them. They would need allies beyond their world. And it was in crisis that the Yanomami spirit, though battered, proved unbreakable. As this period drew on, the Yanomami faced a question that every culture confronted in one form or another. Could they survive the pressures of modernity without losing themselves? Their struggle was no longer just about gardens and hunting grounds. It was about the survival of memory, of rituals, of the sacred bond with the Zapiripe. The forest had given them life for centuries. Would it still protect them in the age of machines and greed? After the long years of hardship, the Yanomami entered a new chapter in their history. This was the era of modernization, a time when their world began to change rapidly, shaped not only by their own resilience but also by the growing attention of the outside world. It was a time of danger and opportunity, of loss and adaptation, and of finding a way to walk between two worlds without losing their soul. The Yanomami had survived disease, invasion, and exploitation, but the scars of the crisis remained. Villages were smaller, families more cautious, and elders spoke of the forest with greater urgency. Yet, as the 20th century moved toward its close, winds of change began to sweep through the Amazon. Governments, pressured by international voices, started to recognize the importance of protecting indigenous territories. For the Yanomami, this marked the beginning of a new kind of struggle, one not fought with bows or arrows but with laws, policies, and global awareness. The creation of protected indigenous reserves became a crucial turning point. In Brazil, after years of campaigning by Yanomami leaders and their allies, the government established one of the largest indigenous territories in the world, an expanse of rainforest officially recognized as belonging to the Yanomami. For the first time, their land was not just theirs in practice but also on paper, defended by international treaties and state law. This was a victory born from years of suffering and activism, and it gave the Yanomami a new tool, the power of legal recognition. Yet modernization was not only about laws. It also entered the villages in more subtle ways. Medical teams began to visit regularly, bringing vaccines and treatments that saved lives from once deadly diseases. Schools were built, offering young Yanomami children the chance to learn Portuguese alongside their native tongue. Some communities embraced these changes, seeing them as tools for survival. Others worried that too much outside influence would weaken their traditions, causing young people to forget the chants, the rituals, and the sacred bond with the forest. Technology also began to make its way into Yanomami life. Radios crackled with news from distant cities. Small airplanes carried visitors into territories that had once taken weeks to reach by river. Some villages experimented with solar panels to power lights or communication devices. To outsiders, these may have seemed small steps, but to the Yanomami, they marked a dramatic shift from the timeless rhythms of their ancestors. The challenge was clear: how to use the benefits of technology without losing the essence of their culture. At the same time, the Yanomami themselves became more visible in the modern world. Leaders like Davi Kopanawa traveled to major cities and even across oceans, speaking in universities, conferences, and parliaments. His words carried the power of the forest, reminding the world that the destruction of the Amazon was not only an environmental tragedy, but also a cultural one. His voice was calm, yet firm, urging people to see the forest not as a collection of resources, but as a living spirit. Through such efforts, the Yanomami entered global conversations about climate change, human rights, and the future of the planet. But modernization was not a simple blessing. With greater exposure came greater risks. Roads built to reach Yanomami villages sometimes opened the way for illegal loggers and miners. The promise of economic gain tempted some young Yanomami to leave their communities in search of work in nearby towns, only to encounter discrimination and poverty. Television and modern goods sparked curiosity but also created desires that were difficult to fulfill in the forest. These changes caused tension, especially between elders who urged preservation and youth who longed to explore the wider world. Still, the Yanomami demonstrated remarkable adaptability. Rather than reject modernization outright, many sought balance. For example, schools in some areas combined lessons in Portuguese with instruction in traditional farming and rituals. Health workers trained Yanomami youth as community nurses, bridging the gap between Western medicine and shamanic healing. Activists used satellite technology to track deforestation, proving that even modern tools could serve the ancient cause of protecting the forest. Perhaps the greatest transformation of this era was the shift in identity. No longer were the Yanomami seen only as isolated forest dwellers. They became recognized as guardians of one of the most important ecosystems on Earth. Environmentalists praised their deep knowledge of the Amazon. Anthropologists marveled at their cultural resilience, and governments, though sometimes reluctantly, began to acknowledge that the future of the rainforest could not be separated from the future of the Yanomami. This recognition, however, also placed a heavy burden on their shoulders. To be a guardian meant constant vigilance. To be a symbol meant constant exposure. The Yanomami had to carry not only their own survival, but also the expectations of the outside world. It was a role both empowering and exhausting. Despite these challenges, the era of modernization was a testament to Yanomami's strength. They had faced destruction but chosen survival. They had seen their world threatened but found allies in unexpected places. They had learned to speak both the language of the forest and the language of the modern world. In doing so, they showed that modernization did not have to mean assimilation. It could mean adaptation, resilience, and the creation of a future where tradition and progress walked hand in hand. As the Yanomami moved through this era, one truth became clear. They were not simply surviving the modern age. They were shaping it. Their fight for land rights inspired movements across the globe. Their defense of the Amazon became part of the broader battle against climate change. Their voices, once silenced by disease and violence, now echoed in international halls of power. And yet, questions lingered. Could the Yanomami preserve their language, their rituals, and their sacred bond with the forest as the world around them accelerated? Could modernization be embraced without losing the ancient wisdom that defined their identity? The answers were not simple, but the Yanomami had already proven one thing. They would not vanish quietly into history. Instead, they stood at the threshold of the future, carrying with them the strength of their ancestors and the determination of a people who refused to be forgotten. The Yanomami may appear, at first glance, to be a people hidden deep within the Amazon, far removed from the currents of global history. Yet their story reveals the opposite. In the modern era, the Yanomami emerged as central figures in conversations that touched every corner of the planet. Conversations about the environment, human rights, cultural preservation, and the meaning of progress itself. Their role in world history is both profound and unexpected. One of their greatest contributions lies in the field of anthropology. When researchers first lived among the Yanomami in the mid-20th century, they encountered a society unlike any other they had studied. The Yanomami challenged Western assumptions about politics, kinship, and spirituality. Their way of life demonstrated that human society could thrive without the institutions of states, cities, or formal hierarchies. Anthropologists published books, films, and articles that brought the Yanomami to international attention. For many readers and viewers, it was the first time they considered that humanity's diversity stretched far beyond familiar models. The Yanomami also became symbols in the global debate about modernization and development. Their struggles highlighted a question that resonates across continents. What is gained and what is lost when indigenous cultures are forced into the mold of the modern world? To some, The Yanomami embodied resistance, proof that societies could reject consumerism and industrialization, yet still live fully. To others, they were a reminder of humanity's responsibility to protect cultures at risk of extinction. Either way, their presence changed the way the world thought about progress. Equally significant was their role in environmental awareness. The Yanomami live in the largest tropical rainforest on Earth, an ecosystem crucial to regulating the planet's climate. Their deep knowledge of the Amazon, its plants, animals, rivers, and seasons, proved invaluable to scientists and activists seeking to understand and protect the forest. For centuries, the Yanomami had acted as guardians of this vast ecosystem, practicing sustainable farming and hunting that maintained the delicate balance of life. Their worldview, that the forest is a living being, filled with spirits deserving of respect, offered a perspective that contrasted sharply with industrial approaches. This perspective became even more vital as the world faced the growing crisis of climate change. International organizations began to point to the Yanomami as examples of how humanity could live in harmony with nature. Their defense of the forest was no longer only about their survival. It became a fight tied to the future of the entire planet. When leaders like Davi Kopanawa spoke at global forums, their words carried the weight of a truth too often ignored. The destruction of the Amazon was not just a local tragedy, but a global one. The Yanomami's role in world history also extended into the arena of human rights. Their struggles helped shape international laws protecting indigenous peoples. Organizations such as the United Nations drew inspiration from their case when crafting declarations that affirmed the rights of Native communities to land, culture, and self-determination. In this way, the Yanomami became part of a much larger movement, an alliance of indigenous groups from around the world demanding recognition and justice. Cultural contributions must also be noted. Through art, rituals, and storytelling, the Yanomami shared a vision of life rooted in interconnectedness. Shamans described journeys with the Fireplace spirits, offering a spiritual philosophy that fascinated and inspired outsiders. Artists and filmmakers, influenced by Yanomami imagery and wisdom, incorporated their themes into works that reached global audiences. Even in distant cities, people encountered Yanomami stories and began to question their own relationship with nature. Of course, their role in world history was not always voluntary. At times, they were pushed into the spotlight by tragedy, massacres, epidemics, and invasions of their land. These events became headlines, sparking outrage and debate. In these moments, the Yanomami reminded the world of the vulnerability of indigenous peoples, forcing governments and citizens alike to confront uncomfortable truths about exploitation and injustice. Yet, what makes their role remarkable is not only their suffering, but also their resilience. They refused to vanish, refused to be silent, and refused to let their culture be erased. By standing firm, they turned their survival into a powerful lesson for the world. The Yanomami became a living testament to humanity's capacity for endurance, adaptability, and wisdom. Their influence can be seen in the alliances they built. Environmental activists, human rights lawyers, and anthropologists joined their cause, forming networks that crossed oceans. Students in Europe and North America learned about the Yanomami in classrooms, while documentaries broadcast their story to millions. In Brazil and Venezuela, their struggles sparked political debates about the meaning of national identity and the treatment of indigenous citizens. The Yanomami also reshaped the way scholars thought about history itself. They showed that world history is not only the story of empires, wars, and cities. It is also the story of small communities whose choices and beliefs ripple outward, touching the planet in unseen ways. In this sense, the Yanomami reminded historians that no culture is too remote to matter. Today, their legacy continues to influence global thought. Movements calling for the protection of the Amazon often cite the Yanomami as proof that sustainable living is possible. Advocates for cultural diversity point to them as an example of the richness of human creativity. and spiritual seekers look to Yanomami cosmology as a source of insight into humanity's relationship with the unseen world. In truth, the Yanomami's role in world history is not confined to the past. It is ongoing. Every decision made about the Amazon, every international treaty on climate change, and every conversation about Indigenous rights carries echoes of their voice. They are no longer hidden deep in the forest. They are woven into the global narrative. And so, as we reflect on their place in the world's story, we must recognize the depth of their contribution. They have taught us about resilience, respect for nature, and the power of cultural identity. They have shown us that even the smallest community can influence the largest debates. And they have reminded us that history is not written only in capitals and palaces, but also in villages beneath the canopy of the Amazon. Every story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Yet the story of the Yanomami does not end here. It continues to unfold in the heart of the Amazon, where children still play in the shade of towering trees, where shamans still chant to the Zapiripe spirits, and where families still gather beneath the roof of the Shabono. Their heritage is not a relic of the past, but a living force that shapes their present and their future. The Yanomami heritage begins with the land itself. For countless generations, the rainforest has been their teacher, protector, and partner. From the leaves that cure illness to the rivers that guide their travel, every element of the forest carries meaning. This deep bond is more than practical, it is spiritual. The Yanomami see the forest as alive, filled with spirits who watch, guide, and sometimes warn. To them, the forest is not a backdrop to life, it is life itself. Preserving this worldview is one of the greatest treasures they offer the modern world. Their language is another cornerstone of heritage. Rich in nuance, it expresses relationships between people, animals, and spirits in ways that no translation can fully capture. Songs, myths, and chants woven into their language carry the wisdom of centuries. Each time a child learns these words, the heritage of the Yanomami grows stronger. Yet, language is fragile, especially when young people are exposed to Portuguese or Spanish in schools. One of the greatest challenges for the future is ensuring that the Yanomami tongue remains alive in every new generation. Rituals and spirituality also remain central. The practice of shamanism, where leaders inhale the powder of sacred plants to communicate with the Zapiripe, is not merely a ceremony. It is the heartbeat of Yanomami identity. Through these rituals, the people connect to the invisible world, seek healing, and maintain harmony with nature. In an age where many societies feel distant from the natural world, this spiritual practice stands as a reminder of humanity's enduring connection to the unseen. Yet the Yanomami face immense challenges as they look toward the future. The threat of illegal mining remains, bringing pollution and conflict into their territories. Deforestation continues to gnaw at the edges of their land, reducing the forest that sustains them. Climate change, with its shifting patterns of rain and heat, disrupts the delicate balance of the ecosystem. These forces create uncertainty, testing the Yanomami's resilience. At the same time, modernization presses ever closer. Young Yanomami encounter televisions, smartphones, and the allure of distant cities. Some dream of opportunities beyond the forest, while others feel the pull of their ancestral traditions. This creates a tension between generations. How can the Yanomami embrace the tools of the modern world without losing the wisdom of the old? The answer is not simple, but it is a question they continue to wrestle with daily. Despite these challenges, there are also opportunities. The Yanomami have become skilled at building alliances with scientists, activists, and global organizations. Their leaders travel to conferences, urging the world to recognize that protecting the Amazon is not only about indigenous rights, but about the survival of the entire planet. Their story has captured the imagination of millions, turning them into symbols of resistance and resilience. In this sense, the Yanomami are not only defending their own future, but also offering a path for humanity itself. Education is one of the most powerful tools shaping that future. In some villages, schools now teach both Portuguese and Yanomami, ensuring that children can navigate the wider world while staying rooted in their own culture. Health programs train Yanomami youth to become community health workers, bridging Western medicine with traditional practices. These steps represent not assimilation, but adaptation, a way to survive in two worlds while belonging fully to both. The Yanomami also see their future bound to the protection of the rainforest. As the lungs of the earth, the Amazon is critical to the stability of global climate. The Yanomami understand this not through scientific charts but through lived experience. They know when the rivers run lower than before, when the birds migrate differently, and when the rains do not come on time. Their knowledge, passed down through generations, is increasingly valued by scientists seeking to understand environmental change. In this way, their heritage becomes a guide for humanity's future. The future of the Yanomami will also depend on respect. Respect from governments, respect from citizens of nearby towns, and respect from the international community. For too long, Indigenous voices were silenced or ignored. Now, with greater recognition, there is hope that policies and protections will grow stronger. But recognition alone is not enough. True respect means listening to their voices, learning from their worldview, and defending their right to live as they choose. As we reflect on the heritage of the Yanomami, we see more than the survival of a single people. We see a mirror held up to humanity itself. They remind us that progress without balance leads to destruction, that wealth without wisdom leads to emptiness, and that the earth is not a possession but a home we must share. Their struggle to preserve their way of life is also a struggle for the soul of our planet. Looking ahead, the Yanomami carry both heavy burdens and shining hopes. The burdens come from threats that never seem to end: miners, loggers, and changing climates. The hopes come from children learning ancient songs, from shamans keeping the spirits close, and from allies around the world standing in solidarity. The future is uncertain, as it always has been. Yet, if the Yanomami have taught us anything, it is that survival is not just about enduring. It is about adapting without forgetting who you are. Their heritage is not locked in the past. It is a living flame carried into tomorrow. The Yanomami remind us that true strength is not found in towering cities or endless machines, but in the quiet wisdom of living with the land, not against it. Their story is a mirror, reflecting what humanity could lose or protect if we choose wisely. If this journey into the heart of the Amazon moved you, don't let it end here. Subscribe to the channel, leave your thoughts in the comments, and share this story with others, so that the voice of the Yanomami, carried by the forest, will never fade into silence.